"Nuns! Nuns!" shouted Father Jack in fear and panic as he sat bolt upright from his drunken stupor in the fictional parochial house on Craggy Island. Good comedy involves the use of stereotypes somewhere in its creation, and the comedy Father Ted was no exception. Now, armed with no other knowledge of Catholicism than my viewing of the comedy Father Ted and the comedy film The Pope Must Die, I started a new job in a convent, as you do, with a local congregation called the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions, or Religieuses de Notre Dame des Missions, RNDM, to give them their official French title. 14 years later, I still work there part-time. As the job was quite isolated, I joined the sisters for lunch on my working days, and I was afforded what turned out to be the absolute privilege of the sisters sharing their selves, their lives, their work, and their missions with me. And this TED Talk stems from that unplanned learning. It is a stereotype buster, and from it you, the audience, will learn a little of what lies behind the convent door. So, firstly, what is being a nun really about? Well, firstly, actually, when is a nun not a nun? And the answer is when she is a religious sister. I will use the term nun throughout this talk because that is the term that most people are familiar with. There is, however, a big distinction and difference between the two. Nuns' lives are spent in work and prayer inside their convent or monastery. Sisters are actually much more active in the world, engaging in many different types of work, often with the most needy people of the world. Both nuns and sisters, however, are called women religious. And what they have in common is that they both take vows to God, they live in a community, they devote their entire life to God, and they live in the spirit of the person or persons who founded their particular religious order. Now, historically, most female religious orders were nuns in the true sense of the word, in that they remained within their convent. But in the early to mid-19th century, however, that began to change. Certain potential nuns felt that they could probably do a better job for humankind by being out and about in the community. Now, remember, the sort of early to mid-19th century was a period of, in the West, of industrialization, the mass movement of people from self-sufficiency in the countryside to urban employment. It was a time of huge poverty, no healthcare, no education. Now, one such woman that really wanted to help this situation was a young French and Creole woman called Euphrasie Barbier. And she founded the RNDM congregation, or the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions, in 1861. And she was the ultimate in girl power. She couldn't find a congregation that did the work she wanted to do, so she just started her own. And from her early beginnings, firstly in London, and then in Lyon in France, Switzerland, where else did she go? Oceania, India, and Bangladesh. She herself grew that congregation just from those early beginnings. Now, 160 years later, in the present day, that same congregation offers health, education, and social services in quite a wide area of the world. They're in Europe, Africa, Asia, South America, Canada, and Oceania. Now, all sisters and nuns give up marriage, children, and personal property so that they are free to respond to the needs of others. And sitting in the UK today, it's hard to imagine why anyone would do this. But it's very easy to forget that very few countries have what we do. A lot of countries, they don't offer free education or free healthcare or social welfare. They don't have human rights. People can't rely on government support. There really is often nothing. And these nuns provide all of that, as well as a voice to the often female disenfranchised. Now, new vocations, which is the term used for women and girls who want to sign up to become nuns or sisters, those new vocations in the 21st century come from these same countries. There's very few from England or Europe. Now, for those girls in the main countries that we're talking about, their futures are likely to be an early marriage, and that's it, and children. But for those who have the religious devotion, ironically, joining a missionary congregation such as our NDM provides unexpected freedoms. Being a member of our NDM provides a girl with an education, and depending on her ability from there, she may experience higher education, paid work, foreign travel, the chance to experience foreign cultures, the chance to develop herself to be her best self. And really, who'd have thought that nuns study the Myers-Briggs management indicators? And yes, all sisters today do have smartphones. They are just people. They're people like us. Being a sister, however, is not about receiving. They receive this help so that they, in turn, can then give out to others to practice what they're preaching and to live their values and beliefs amongst the most needy people of the world. And this is not necessarily an easy feat. Some sisters do have a quieter life. They might work in the UK their entire life, maybe as a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, a cook, to name but a few, giving up their salary to fund projects in poorer and more needy parts of the world, while receiving their board and lodging and a small personal allowance in return. But for others, it's tougher, much tougher. If we take Sister Pauline, for example, she was working in Kenya, and she found herself in the middle of a coup against the then president, Daniel Arap Moi. She had been up country running a training course for local teachers, and she was just driving back home to the convent in her car. She suddenly found herself in a war zone. She was surrounded by soldiers. She was held up at gunpoint. They were demanding to know what she was doing out and about in her car. And she suspects that at that point, being white and wearing the white religious habit as they're wearing there probably saved her life, because the soldiers could see that she was very unlikely to be tangled up in the politics surrounding the coup. Now, Sister Pauline lived to tell the tale, but she faced, quite a lot of danger when she was back in the UK. She was working in a drug rehabilitation centre, and one of the women that she'd been working with failed to return home, to return back to the drug centre after a home visit. And what had happened was that the woman had been accosted by her former pimp when she was out on this home visit. And Sister Pauline found herself driving around the worst parts of an inner city in the north of England, trying to rescue her client. And at this point, she was not wearing the habit. That would have put her at great risk. She was in civvies. She was in jeans and a jumper with her smartphone, looking like everybody else. Now, Sister Pauline's experiences in Kenya are perhaps the stereotypical view of mission. You've got white sisters out with black people. These are Maasai tribespeople in Kenya. But in the 21st century, we're now beginning to see mission in reverse. We see, for example, Sister Mary. She's an RNDM sister. She's African, and part of her mission at the moment is in France. So we have the African sister coming to help the needy of Europe. Another aspect to RNDM that I was not expecting was their really ecumenical outlook. They have a shared interest in humanity, and faith of all denominations interests them. And they help all in need. It doesn't matter what your religion or background. If you need their help, they will give you their resources. I also wasn't expecting to talk to one sister who regularly tunes in to Al Jazeera TV for the community aid programs. And for those who haven't heard of Al Jazeera TV, it's an Arabic broadcaster based in Qatar. And a personal friend of mine from Bahrain visited the convent with me one day. And she and the sisters engaged in a very lively and mutually interesting discussion on the ideological differences between Islam and Christianity. They went on for 2 hours. I was struggling. I just ate the biscuits. I just couldn't tune into any of it, but they kept going for 2 hours. They were having a whale of a time. So to return to Sister Pauline, she summed it up very nicely for us. And she said that as a missionary, she was privileged to be sent to work in Africa. And although her main work was in education, she was often called upon to work in many other areas. So she helped when there was drought. She helped with aid distribution. She helped with feeding centres with malnourished babies and children. And she also enabled quite a poor woman, I think it was in South Africa, to obtain her identity card. She kept on going down to the police station, but she was just getting pushed aside. She wasn't very articulate, she wasn't literate, she had nothing. And without that identity card, she had no recognition as a citizen in her own country. So Pauline would go down with her and got her that card. And she also found a young girl in the Kenyan bush with a cleft palate. So Pauline arranged for her to have surgery on that. Pauline says that her experience in Africa has made her much more grateful and contented for what we have in the UK. She said that we need many more young people to take up the challenge of serving the more needy of the world. Now, when I started planning this talk on nuns, I wasn't expecting to be writing about sex, drugs, prostitution, and violence. But many of these sisters who I work with as their archivists, they have faced risks in their life that I just don't want, thank you very much. And they've experienced things that a lot of us really wouldn't want to experience. And so these sisters, I've concluded, really are the embodiment of all you can be. I've learnt to never dismiss the life experience of others. You just don't know who you could be talking to.